Hi there and welcome to this, the Rethinking the Human Factor podcast with me, your host, Bruce Hallas. Thank you very much for joining us on the show today. For those of you who are new to the show, what is the show actually all about? Well, the show's all about raising awareness, influencing behaviour, and fostering an organisational culture where information security and data protection are truly valued. Where did the idea for the show come from? Well, really, it's a spin out of over 7.5 years worth of research that I've been performing into rethinking the human factor. And as part of that sort of process of reassessing what the actual challenge was, identifying opportunities for improving how we currently go about addressing the lofty goals of awareness, behaviour and culture within organisations, I really became fully exposed to the broad range of disciplines which could really significantly increase our chances of actually getting the objectives, the business requirements that we're really looking for. Now, the thing with all of these different disciplines is that when I looked what were the disciplines that we had within the industry, the conversations we had within the industry, back then, it was clear there was a real gap between what we needed and what we had. And what this podcast was about is about introducing people who specialize in those disciplines, whether they were from within the security and data protection industry or without, whether they were academics and researchers or they were practitioners. The one thing that binds everybody that we want to come on the show is their willingness to come and share insights and their own experiences of how they have driven changes in levels of awareness, behavior and culture within organizations. Not always about security and data protection, more often not about stuff outside of the industry, but all of it completely relevant when it comes to designing with the human in mind. For the first time in Series 3 of the show, we have got sponsorship and support from the industry. And so I just really want to take this opportunity to thank Jason Haynick from Habituate. Now, Jason is one of the founders at Habituate, and Habituate is an organization that's based out in the United States. But, prior to setting up Habituate, Jason actually worked as an education awareness manager for some really, really big names. And he wanted to address some of the challenges that he had as an education awareness manager. And that's where he went about setting up Habituate. Now, if you want to get in contact with Jason and Habituate, the best ways for you to do that, Jason is highly active on social media. You can find him on LinkedIn, you can find him on Twitter, okay? And you can get in contact with him or any member of the Habituate team by going to www.habituate.com. I'll spell that for you, HABITU, and then the number 8. Very clever. So thank you, Jason, and thank you, Habituate, for sponsoring the show. Hi there, and welcome to this, the Rethinking the Human Factor podcast with me, your host, Bruce Hallas. And it's an absolute pleasure today to have on a show somebody I actually came in contact with a little while ago. Do you know what? I can't remember how far back it was, but it was a little while ago. And I've been trying to get her on the show for a little while, but she's incredibly busy. But luckily, I agreed with her quite some time ago about getting her on Series 3. So it's an absolute pleasure to introduce you to Sarah Moffat. Hi, Sarah. Thank you very much for joining us on the show.
Hey, Bruce. It is awesome to be here. Thanks so much for having me.
Oh, absolute pleasure. I have been trying to get you on the show for a little while. I don't know if it's a delay in LinkedIn messaging or something, but it's like been a massive delay.
We're two ships passing in the Atlantic.
We certainly are. It's a very big ocean out there. Yes. So, Sarah, do you want to explain to our listeners who you are, what it is you do, and I guess a little bit about what's the journey that you've been on to get you to where you are at the moment when it comes to education and awareness?
Sure. So I work in cybersecurity, education, training, and awareness for the federal government. And I've been doing this role and related roles for quite some time. I actually came into the field probably about 15 years ago doing technical training for the Federal Aviation Administration. And back then, we were first rolling out the RSA secure IDs and getting people those little key fobs and helping to explain, how that worked. That pre-existed a lot of the security that we have now, but that's where I first came in to all of this, all of those years ago. And so my journey along that path has been, looking at how people learn technology and looking at really what I think is so important to address, which is people's attitudes about technology. And so that has always been my foot in the door everywhere I've gone, is that I like to really think about what are people feeling about the technology that we're talking about, the cybersecurity we're talking about, and addressing that head on. Because if you don't address learner attitudes, you're really not going to be able to influence them the way that you need to. So that's kind of what I've been doing. And I did technology training for a long time. And then I came to an agency in the government that they asked me to help them develop privacy training. And so I did privacy work for a little bit, and then that rolled into cybersecurity education and cybersecurity awareness and cybersecurity training. And so I've been really focused on those two things for the last 5 or 6 years primarily.
Wow. Okay. And I think it's really interesting what you were sort of picking up there about how people feel towards technology. Do you think that there's anything generational in how people feel towards technology at all?
I do. I really love the idea of storytelling. So that's something I use a lot. I call it the Jesus method of instructional design. Like him or not, believe him or not, everybody knows the story of the Good Samaritan. Everybody knows the story of the prodigal son, because a good story, it just lasts a long time. So looking at how people interpret stories and how they relate to them and how you tell them, it does differ from generation to generation. And I remember a couple years ago, like trying to figure out where the for millennials in particular, like why are millennials so kind of ambivalent to cybersecurity, and really understanding that their view of it is so different than, say, mine as a Gen Xer or somebody else's who might be a baby boomer, and really looking at those attitudes and figuring out how to address them in the most positive, meaningful way.
That whole point about attitudes, then, is it something that you sort of try and understand the generational map within an organization, and then using that to sort of try and map the attitudes within those generations, and then building something with that in mind?
Exactly. And I came across that just by chance when I was at FAA, and I used to have this pilot who would come to my training classes. And when you think about like what it would be like to pilot an airline jet, all of the knobs and buttons and all of the technology. And he used to say to me, like, it would be so much easier for me to teach you how to fly a jet than it is for you to help me understand how to do a PowerPoint. And it used to make me laugh, because I'm like, are you kidding me? PowerPoint's so easy. But for him, his attitude about it was the thing that I had to overcome. Like, this guy knows technology, obviously, and he understands how important safety is and all that other stuff. So I just had to learn how to overcome that pre-existing attitude he had about each particular technology differently. And, then he was able to overcome and really succeed and thrive. So that was where that really came into play for me. And I've seen it over and over and over again throughout my career.
It's interesting you're going to use the example of the pilot there, because I remember I set something up called the Analogies Project, and one of the best analogies, there was a competition run at an event, a big conference, and one of the winner of the best analogy, as part of all the presentations that were done, was actually by the chief security officer from Lufthansa. and he was talking about how he was developing some training within Lufthansa, and they were using the cockpit as the context for doing the training, obviously around those people who had access to the cockpit. But also everybody knew that Lufthansa was all about planes and getting people from A to B. And so he used the context of the cockpit, and he was like drawing analogies between the cockpit and what people did within the cockpit with information security, and it went down really, really well. And I had to give him the prize for the best information security analogy. And it's interesting you were talking about pilots, because it just brought me straight back to him, and I was like, right, I was like, for a minute, I was like, don't tell me Sarah's going to draw an analogy directly with the cockpit of a plane. I said, because I've heard this one before.
Oh my gosh.
It's interesting that it highlights that for most of for all of us that use PowerPoint, it's just like, well, it's pretty straightforward. But for a pilot, it's just like, oh no. And then there's this attitude towards PowerPoint in particular. He or she clearly has got capability to deal with something which is incredibly complicated, which is
exactly.
Flying a plane is not as straightforward as we'd like to think, maybe. Okay, so moving on from the attitude piece, What is your view? I mean, I know you have got views on this. What is your view regarding how, as an industry, in the past anyway, we've tended to see cybersecurity as almost like education and awareness, as almost like a standalone piece? Because we've spoken about this in the past, the sense of it's a standalone piece of training. It's seen as a standalone piece.
Mm-hmm.
What's your views around that? Is it a good thing or not so good thing?
I think that it's, this to me is that's my soapbox for 2020.
Okay.
So you hit the nail on the head for me. To me, I think the more we separate cybersecurity, the more we're doing ourselves a disservice. So I like to say we need to bring the virtual to reality. In that, when we first started talking about cybersecurity awareness and training, however many years ago, we had a big desktop at our office that we came to every day and we logged in. And it was important for us to reset our passwords and to remember to encrypt emails, right? And don't let people get in the door behind you, no tailgaters. And, that was kind of what we were talking about for cybersecurity. There was, maybe you had a cell phone that had internet access on it, but probably not unless you were a CEO of some big company. And now, the reality is so different. The reality that my son is, age 5 and he's looking for the Wi-Fi password at McDonald's, right? So for us to continue to talk about cybersecurity as this, once a year thing or maybe once a month thing if you're highly evolved, where it's, a thing that you do that's technology based, I think it's just missing the mark that cybersecurity is a fundamental piece of what we do in life now, akin to locking your front door when you leave your house and kind of closing the windows when it rains. Like, there are just things that you do in life, and cybersecurity, we need to learn how to integrate that into everything we do. And at work, I think when we're talking about, there's core competencies that organizations want from their people. They want ethical people. They want people who play well with others. I want good people with good oral and written communication skills, but also I want people who put the cybersecurity of the organization, of the fellow workers at the forefront in everything that they do. It needs to be as core to all competencies as, not yelling at people at work. I think that's my personal belief.
So it's almost in a way, the way that you're seeing it is it's like a life skill, isn't it?
I really think it is. And, I think back, I've been kind of thinking of this analogy for a little while. A long time ago, long time ago, most people didn't know how to read. And the people who did know how to read were the scholars and usually kind of the priests in the church, right? Yeah. And then all of a sudden the printing press comes out and everybody gets a Bible. Well, thank you for the Bible, but I have no idea what to do with this because I can't read it. And so, you had all this empowerment right in front of you, but you didn't know what to do with it. And I think as cybersecurity educators, we have this wonderful opportunity to teach everybody how to read and look at how it's going to really enrich their lives and empower them. I mean, if you learn really to, again, going back to the attitude, if you have an attitude where cybersecurity is ingrained in your life and you're practicing it, then you're not walking around afraid all the time. And you're not walking around being uninformed, and you're not waiting for someone else to tell you what to think about Alexa, right? You can form your own opinion because you have been learning this as part of an everyday type of education awareness core competency.
Does that sort of suggest, I guess that you might infer from that the education needs to start well before people enter into the workplace?
It does. And I think we're doing better with that, but I don't know at work that we're doing such a good job at tying it together. And I've been a contractor for many different companies and organizations. I like to say, hey, listen, if we don't make cybersecurity personal, people aren't going to pay attention, right?
Yeah.
I need to let them know why they should care about this. And that's, I know, a hallmark of a foundation of what you believe as well. Like, if you don't make them understand why, then you're not doing a good job. And the why, I'm sorry, y'all, the why cannot be just to protect data at work, because that's not going to get to the core of what people are and who they are.
Yeah.
So that's why I think it needs to be far more ingrained, far more foundational than it is now.
So if we can go back that way, because I mean, what you're sort of painting there at the picture is that maybe something that within the working environment, it's not really building upon what's happening pre-work. And when I think of pre-work, I think about in previous interviews we've done with guests, and one of the guests has been a gentleman by the name of Gert-Jan Hofstede, who's very well known when it comes to sort of culture at a national level, but also he's also worked within the context of organizational culture, and his father's done a lot of work in that over the last 40, 50 years as well. And one of the interesting things that he alludes to is how cultures are formed through a process of experience of people engaging with informal structures like, your families, your friends, that type of thing as you're growing up, but also formalized structures like school, college, universities, that type of thing. Yeah. So do you think that that the workforce of today is turning up with skills regarding cybersecurity, with values which are related to elements of cybersecurity, placing a value on privacy, for example, and ethics, which are so? Do you think that everything pre-work, the institutions that are out there, the things that we share as parents and I guess close family members and communities, do you think that what we're sharing at that sort of very informative stage before people get to work is actually supporting what we're trying to do when we go to work? Because I think sometimes, we try shifting the ship in terms of work when people start to address the challenges. But it's by that time, a lot of the values and attitudes that that you talk about have already been formed in 16, 17, 18, 20 plus years. And then does that make it a really big challenge for us as education and awareness professionals?
I think that's such a great question, a great point. And I wish I knew the answer, how everybody else is doing it. But I would say, based on what I see, the answer is no, we're probably not doing a great job at that. I think we have, and I guess this goes back to kind of where I start, which is I don't think we're doing a great job at bringing the virtual to reality in a meaningful way. So, when I was talking with, and I'm not going to say all millennials, I'm just going to say the millennials that I happened to be talking to during this specific project. I was trying to talk to them about privacy and, kind of why were they so haphazard with it? And the resounding response was, the jig is up. We've lost our identities so many times and so many breaches. Why bother?
Yeah.
And that attitude of why bother is what I realized I had to come up to and really address. And what I talked to them about, it was like, well, why bother is you don't have any kids yet, but when you do, that's going to matter to them, the things that you've put out now. Or, when you go to buy a house and your credit is messed up because, you weren't paying such great attention to it and you didn't realize that your identity had been stolen, whatever. So, bringing it back to financial responsibility and their being able to buy the things that they wanted to buy and look to the future toward building families and things like that, then they started to understand it. So I think that you're asking a really, really important question, which is, again, like, how are we getting this to the fundamental base of the culture? And I just don't think, our teachers are and we as adults, right? Parents, whether you're an aunt or an uncle or a foster mom or whatever, we're teaching our kids to look both ways before they cross the street, and we're teaching them not to talk to strangers. But are we also talking to them about social engineering? And what does that look like? And so I've become kind of popular around DC because I tell the story of Little Red Riding Hood in a way that really shows that Little Red Riding Hood was in fact a victim of social engineering, and that the wolf managed to get Red's PII and her grandmother's PHI her location, and all the information he needed while he distracted her with something she knew she wasn't supposed to do, right?
Yeah.
Don't go off into the field. But hey, don't you think your grandmother would like these flowers, right? So it's classic social engineering. And then people go, oh, okay, so if we can learn how to bring this into the school systems and higher ed in a meaningful way, so that when they come into the workforce, exactly like you said, it's part of the everyday vernacular, it's commonplace culture, and you come in with people, and you have people coming in with not just kind of peripheral know-how of cybersecurity, but they can do it, and it's part of who they are.
Yeah. And I think that's it, because there's the process of understanding how you do something, and there's I think the interesting, there's like knowing how to identify a situation where you need to do something. Then there's knowing what to do in that situation, and then the real art seems to be in tipping the scale in favor that they will actually choose to do it, because a lot of this comes down to personal choice. Right. I remember many years ago having a chat with somebody when we were talking about what their controls were around confidentiality of information. It was client information. And they said, well, it's actually in people's contracts, and it says that you will keep information confidential. And it was like, okay, so how do they know what that applies to? How do they know how to do it? And then how are you increasing the chance that they're going to do it? And then because their take was, they'll do it because it's in the contract. And you're like, no, that's like saying that people will comply with the law. But here in the UK, we've got a prison system which is bursting with people who haven't actually complied with the law. And I think if you look around the world, and there's a lot of that happening. Right. And what that tells us is that it's human nature at times not to comply with things. And I think anecdotally, most of us who work in information security probably have a fair few stories about that. Right. But that's the thing. It's so you can train people to be aware of a situation. You then can train them what they need to do in that situation. But it's about getting them then to actually, how do you increase the chances that they're going to choose to do that when they find themselves in that situation?
And that goes back to that goes back to the attitude that they have about it. Yeah. And it goes back to, really, why should I care about this? To me, that's the thing. Like, I deal in the federal agency that I'm in now. It's a large agency, and we've got a lot of people to reach, and it's like, do your annual awareness training every March or April, whatever it is, and check the box, and we're compliant now. But how am I going to make you care the rest of the year when you're sending however many emails and they might have really personal information in them? And how do I make you care about somebody else's personal information, let alone your own? And so we have to figure out how to motivate people, although I hate saying that word, motivate, how to inspire people to give a damn, honestly.
Yeah. The why. Yeah, which is the why. I'm determined to get the why man onto the show. It's going to take ages. It's going to take ages for me to get him on, but I will eventually get there, hopefully. Yeah, so it's the why, and the values and the attitudes piece, which is, again, the culture piece, is one of those things that helps tip the scales in the favour that people are going to choose to comply. Now, you just mentioned something, actually, which I think is quite interesting. I'm sure that our listeners have probably got views on this, so I wouldn't mind getting your view on this. Once a year training.
I giggle, yes.
You giggle, I laugh, and I'm like, okay, you know where this is going, don't you? Worthwhile or something that has to be done?
I think neither.
Okay.
About 2 years ago, I spoke at the Federal Information Systems Security Educators Association. It's a mouthful, FISEA conference. Yeah. And I talked about the value of storytelling. And, one of my ideas was to have a storytelling campaign that's once a quarter. And, look, if you only do security awareness training once a year, how in the world can you be relevant to the current risk culture of your organization. Like that's impossible. I think that's impossible because the risks are changing, the threats are changing, and you cannot be agile enough if you're just putting together a once-a-year training. It's, maybe as effective as getting a flu shot once a year, and maybe you won't get the flu, but you probably will. If you're not doing everything else that you need to do to be healthy and wash your hands and, stay away from sick people. So I think it's probably something like that. Like it's maybe a good idea, but I think if you're relying on that to be the piece that ties everything together to keep your company safe or your organization or industry, then you are lying to yourself. I think it needs to be, if I put a little piece of cybersecurity in your ethics training, in your sexual harassment training, in your onboarding, in your 6-month review, in your quarterly performance updates, if I am putting this, like we talked about earlier, into the culture of the organization, that I believe will be far more effective. I mean, you see organizations that tout, oh, we're an ethical company, but they don't really do anything that like promotes ethics. But then you've got other companies where you see it on the walls and you see it in their handbooks, and they're wearing a tie that says, I practice this ethical thing, right? And they make it part of the culture, then everybody knows what it is. It's top of mind. And that's how we need to be with cybersecurity, because again, it's not something you leave at work anymore. You carry it in your pocket all the time. Yeah.
And I think it's interesting because part of some work that I'm doing at the moment is working with an organization who truly understand what it means to have a brand. And I think within security, and I think this has come up in other with other guests as well. A lot of people don't see brand as like actually identity, like a logo. And then for anybody that's worked in marketing, like one of my for my sins, one of the areas I trained in when I was at university was in marketing, and I carried that through the early bit of my career. Brand is much more than that. And a core part of branding strategy is about what they call touch points. So the more touch points you have with your target audience, your target market for your brand, the more opportunities you have to build what is called brand equity.
Yes.
And brand equity is like, it's like the goodwill that you and I, as target market for a product or a service, I think of security as the product or the service. The more touch points there are, the more opportunity there is to build brand value and equity and goodwill, and for people to associate positively with the brand. And that increases the likelihood, if you look at behavioral science, that it transfers into increasing the likelihood that people will choose to comply with a message or training or anything else that's coming out of that brand, the security brand. And so when you talk about all those things, you just gave like 6 or 7, here, and here. Okay. For me, I listen to and I go, that's branding strategy. It's about touch points can I leverage, to get my brand across and for my brand values to be associated with the values of my target market, and that swings things. Or you speak to most marketers, they will go, that is what we try to do when we try to influence behavior to get people to buy into our products.
1,000% agree. And I think that's something that I would love to see more of. And I've been talking to some of my colleagues in the industry of, where are, and I know they're out there and they're probably more than I know about, but where are the cyber communication folks that are working with the CISOs and the CIOs to bridge the communication gap between marketing and CIO and HR and CIO and chief learning officers and CIO, so that the message of CIO is getting into every other part of the C-suite under their skin. I mean, it really has to be there, but it has to be there, in a meaningful way. So it's not like under your skin, but it's just a part of who you are. And we need those, like you're saying, brand ambassadors, cybersecurity brand ambassadors, cybersecurity, communications, marketing people, whatever, that can understand the critical nature of what's happening and put it in a way that is, for lack of a better word, palatable to folks that don't understand cybersecurity, that makes them care, that makes them want to do something about it. How are we bridging the human capital folks with the CIO folks so that we're putting cybersecurity into more of our training? How are we talking to, how are we bridging the gaps between our learning officers and our chief information security officers? So then when we're talking about upskilling and reskilling and all of the other, things that we're trying to do to close the critical skills gap, how are we engaging our learning folks? Because our learning folks are the ones that understand attitudes, and they're the ones that can really help us push the message over the finish line in a meaningful way, in a way that sometimes maybe technologists don't. Technology people, they're often very good with zeros and ones and maybe not so good with human beings. And so we really need to engage community better to make it more meaningful.
Yeah. I think that's the interesting observation, because where do the people who are given the responsibility of educating people, of trying to raise awareness, of trying to influence behavior, of trying to, embed something within an organization, a culture, to change any of those things, where are they coming from? What skills do you actually need, and what skills do they have? And what you're sort of reflecting upon there is the gap sometimes skills-wise and experience-wise between the people that are given the responsibility of possibly doing the hardest job in security. You can install hardware and software. It does what we tell it to do. Contrary to my own experience of using any of my equipment, where I do tell it what I want it to do, and it still does something completely different, obviously. But on the whole, hardware and software, you configure these things. They are zeros and ones. It's a process, and there is, you go through the process, and the outcome should be consistent. People it's a completely different kettle of fish. And in fact, a kettle of fish would be easier to deal with potentially when it comes to trying to influence behaviour. I'm sure it would be a lot easier, but probably not as pleasurable. I think there's a lot of value from trying to influence people. But I guess coming back to the point, the gap that exists between those who are given responsibility for trying to bring around awareness and influence behaviour and inform a culture, and the actual skills. So, what do you see that this is as a big gap currently within the industry?
I sure do. And I mentioned it to a couple chief information security officers. And every time I say, who's doing this? They're like, oh my God, who is doing that? My father was senior systems engineer for the U.S. Secret Service.
Right.
And my whole life, I grew up listening to stories of server rooms and mainframes and bad boys, what you going to do when they come for you kind of thing. And my mom is a published author. And so I really had the benefit of both sides where, I listened to him talking at dinner every night, and I started to understand the technical concepts that he was talking about. And then at one point in my career, which was very cool, I was a database manager for a government agency, and I was actually my dad's client. And so he and I would sit in meetings together and talk about databases and migrating things, and it was always really fun. But I had that part of it, but I also had my mom who was always telling stories and always looking at things a different way. So I learned technology probably through softer eyes, right? A different lens. And I think there are a lot of people like me out there, a lot of people like you out there, Bruce, who look at technology not just from the hardware and the software and the security risk protocol and governance and compliance standpoint, but from the human standpoint. And that's what I think we need more of. And we need people who understand marketing and communication and branding and human resources and learning to really partner holistically with the information folks so that we can make this ingrained and integral to what we're doing everywhere, because it is. And in 3 years from now, it's going to be even more ingrained, right? I feel like we're a little bit behind, but don't you think that idea of that like person sounds like it would take us to a new place?
Yeah, completely. But I think part of the challenge that we've got is that I was having a chat with somebody who attended the SANS European Summit, which is a great event that's run over here, usually in London, and SANS will run these summits all around the world. And as part of that, they were highlighting that SANS had done some research, and they were saying actually the percentage of people given responsibility for awareness, behavior, and culture within an organization, the percentage of them who aren't focused on the challenged, so it's another hat they wear.
Mm-hmm, exactly.
Okay, is really high. I can't remember the figure, but we were talking about it. I was like, yeah, it is really high. I mean, my gut instinct, based upon the 6 years worth of research I've been doing into the human factor, is there aren't many people that I really educate which are focused on this. The size of the team is pretty small. The majority of people that are looking at this is just another hat that they've got to wear. And actually, a majority of them come from skills and experience where they haven't actually got any formalized career paths, training around skills. And I still find it really interesting that from a regulatory perspective, you look at NIST, for example, PCI DSS, ISO 27001, the regulators are putting in there, and they just say education and awareness. And I look and I go, but actually the outcome we want is behavior and culture.
Preach.
Yeah, and you're just like, well, hold on, you're sort of creating a rod for our backs here, because, majority of people that are listening to this podcast really believe in influencing behavior and embedding something within an organizational culture. But a lot of the approaches will do enough to get over the line, which means we need to tick the box that we've provided education once a year, maybe more often, and that we make people aware through some sort of communication piece, or we've got them to sign a contract, or they've gone through an induction program. And there's a problem here, because you start again, right, the objective is behavior and culture. To manage risk, that's what you're really looking for. But you've got regulators that are saying it's just education and awareness that we're asking people to do here. And then people recruit according to that. We can get people who can train and make people aware. But actually, the real thing that drives risk down more broadly across an organization, and definitely within society, is influencing behavior. So then you're like, okay, so I need to find people who understand how behaviors are formed and influenced, and how culture's formed and influenced. Right. And I just, for me, it's like part of the problem we've got at the moment is the regulatory environment, which drives a lot of the investment, is emphasizing just one bit of the equation, yet we're all measured against behavior and culture.
Yeah, it's nutty. And, I think how we talk about it too really needs to, like, you are such a strong voice as a proponent for putting, the human back at the center of this. And we need more of that, because we're not protecting data and we're not protecting systems. We're protecting human beings. At the end of the day, we're going to talk about the critical infrastructure and electricity and water and all that. Yes, we're talking about a thing, but we're also talking about the people who rely on it to live. Yep. When we're talking about protecting PII, that's a person's PII. So the further we get away from remembering that these are human beings that we are trying to protect and defend, the less good our training is going to be, the less effective our awareness campaigns are going to be, and the less impact we are going to have on the behaviors and the attitudes of those people that we are trying to protect.
Often when I speak to people, I don't know what your experience with this is as well, the shift seems to be towards trying to do training which is more focused around the impact of people's own lives, rather than focusing on the impact within the context of work. It's about training people in their own lives and allowing them to bring those skills back into the workspace.
Yes. And I think that is the most effective way to do it. And I think that also goes back to the question you asked me earlier, which was, how good of a job are we doing at making this impact at home, at school, before they enter the workplace? And this is one of those places. But I think when we get to, like you said, this compliance-based training, it's, this regulation body says that you must do training once a year. And if you don't, you're going to be penalized. But really, if you look at why we're doing it, and if you remember the organization's why, your why as a leader in the company always should tie back to the people. And I think if you remember who you are and why you're there, and ultimately, it's not about, well, maybe in my own little world, maybe it's not about making all the money. Maybe it's about building community, and maybe it's about enriching people's lives and giving them quality products and, helping them live longer. Whatever your company's mission is, it always should tie back to people. And so there is an easy way to tie cybersecurity to that, because that also is about protecting people.
And I wonder whether or not there's something, we're seeing big changes around the world, around things like climate change, whether you believe in it or you don't. That's not, I guess, the point I'm going to draw from this. It's just that, when I look at certain generations, I was watching the TV here in UK, and I was looking at programs that are coming out, and the programs, the people that are heading up these programs, the very public side of it, are of a particular sort of generation. And there are these values that are bubbling to the surface, which are very focused upon the greater good. Mm-hmm. And a recognition that actually from, actually promoting and delivering the greater good, individuals will benefit. And that individual could be you, it could be me, it could be anybody that's out there. And it's quite interesting because I think there is this thing which comes from, which seems to be prevalent at the moment. Possibly it's been around for before, I don't know, maybe I've just never noticed it, but this whole thing with climate change, where this growing gathering at a very generational level, but all generations, but within a specific younger generational thing, and saying, well, this is going to have an impact on me. I believe in it. It's going to have an impact upon me. So I'm out there and I'm putting it together. I'm working with people as communities, but I know that on an individual basis, it's going to benefit me. And in many ways, that's what we want people to do around security, is to see that it's not just about the benefit to me as an individual, it's about the benefit to society as a whole. I play a part, and if we all play a part and we all step up a level, then it's greater than the sum of the individual parts, I think, is the philosophy there.
That's a really, really good analogy. I think that you're spot on with that. So
in terms of what do you think has been the challenges around, one of the things that I've spoken to people on the show and outside of the show, the challenges around getting investment in education awareness. And when I think of investment, it's not just dollars, euros, pounds, whatever. It's investment, even in terms of just time.
Yeah.
What's your experience as that as a problem to achieving the objectives that often people have set out for us?
I don't know I actually don't know how to approach this. And I've been thinking about this a lot, because I've been in companies before where the CISO of this one particular agency I'm thinking of, she is so forward thinking, and she's always got the awareness and education at the front of her mind. And I don't know if it's because, I don't know if it's maybe she's got a psychology background and she really understands how important it is from a human perspective. But then there are other organizations where awareness and education are fluff, right? It's just the fluff thing that you have to do to comply with whatever, company policy is there. And so ultimately, I think it goes to the attitude of the leadership and how the leadership at that particular organization or agency views the bottom line. What is the bottom line to that person or to those people? And if the bottom line is the budget and we can't afford a full-time person to teach awareness, then you're hosed. But if the bottom line for that person is, let's protect the integrity of the people who work here and their families and our constituents or our customers, then you're going to have a far different approach toward integrating cybersecurity into everything that you do. So I think What we really need to start working on is the attitudes and the willingness to try new things, right? Like we can't keep saying, no, that's not going to work. We've got to say, let's give it a go. See if it works.
That's really interesting, because there are a lot of people that will say, you come up with new ideas and they'll say, nah, that's not going to work. And then you ask to go, why? Have we tried this? Is there any data around that? And people do. I think sometimes it's like, because it hasn't been done before, it's seen as a risk. And if it hasn't been done before and it's seen as a risk and it requires a significant investment, then it's like it's a significant risk, because there's an investment behind it as well, which I think sort of highlights something which is really important. I know that it's something I've written about in my book, but I also know that we've recently done an interview with a guest where we talked about marginal gains, where you try and identify really small tweaks to what you're doing, which don't necessarily require a significant investment, and then monitoring that and A/B testing to see whether or not it actually produces results. Mm-hmm. And I think this is often, the next big thing is coming in with a big price tag associated with that investment. And if you take it to, those people who are going to basically sign off the investment, give you the funding, the questions they are going to ask are like, so where has this been done before? Have we done it? No. Otherwise I wouldn't be asking for the money now. Okay. And the second point is, okay, if we haven't done it, is there anybody in our industry that's done it? And it might be very well, no, but this is going to mark us out as thought leaders in the industry. Our customers are going to love us for doing this and paying the extra attention that we need to do. If there's ever any regulatory issues, there's a breach, we can show how we've taken, a leading approach to this type of thing. Okay. Is there anybody else that's done it? No. Okay. And it's just that's then seen as a risk, and it stops people moving forward. Whereas these small marginal gains are something you can turn around and go, well, the risk, the financial risk, or the time that's invested is relatively small. So it makes it something that you can try to push forward upon, because otherwise what you end up doing is you end up doing the same thing you've done before. What's the Einstein quote about that?
Right. Well, so it's funny. That is exactly what I mentioned, the FACEA conference that I spoke at 2 years ago. And that was the title of my presentation, was Security Awareness Training is Insane. Because we keep doing the same thing over and over again and expecting a different result. And the thing is, you get folks in there with the best of intentions. Oh, we're going to try this new thing. Somebody shoots down the idea. You try to come up with something different. You don't come up with it in time. So you end up just kind of revamping last year's training and putting it out again. And then you've gone through a year cycle before you know it. And I think that there are ways, my point from that particular presentation was storytelling is cheap.
Yeah.
Does not cost a lot of money to tell a good story, and stories elicit emotions, and emotions change behaviors, and that's what we're going for. So it's not extremely expensive to supplement your annual training with, maybe a good storytelling video once a year, twice a year, 3 times a year of, it doesn't have to be a cautionary tale. It can be a goodwill story about somebody who saved somebody else's financial destiny by reminding them to encrypt something. I don't know. But I think storytelling is cheap, and there are a lot of really inexpensive solutions out there that capitalize on things that we know work for people. And we know what drives people, right? Love drives people. Compassion, helping other people. There are human drives inside of us that we, as cybersecurity awareness training education professionals, can tap into more often. Just because the topic is technical does not mean that we cannot use humanity and emotions and attitudes and things like that to really make a difference. And that stuff, yes, done on a huge scale may be expensive eventually, but originally, like I said, a story is cheap and it's meaningful if it's done well.
And I think on that note, I'd like to say thank you for joining us on the show and sharing the insights and It's been an absolute pleasure. I just knew it when we get on the show. It's going to go, whoa, brilliant. And it has been exactly that. So
thank you so much. It's been such a delight for me. You are one of my heroes, Bruce, and I just admire and respect you so much. Thank you for this wonderful opportunity.
Thank you. I don't know what to say. Maybe I should get that recorded and send it over to my mum. But no, seriously, thank you very much. I'm in a very, very fortunate position where there is so much going on and there's so many great people to be spending time with, and spending time with people like yourselves and, all the research you do and talking to all these people who work outside of cybersecurity, but they've got the same challenges as us. And it's like, wow, what can we learn from all these people who have been doing it for so long in so many other areas? And then just let's bring that all in. And then actually, when you share that stuff, you start to get people like yourselves who like, wow, they got this bit and this bit here and here. And you're just like, oh, it's great. You don't feel so alone.
Exactly.
Yeah, you're like, okay, I'm not insane. There are other people out there that are thinking differently like this. Yeah, okay. Thanks very much for joining us.
Hi there. Well, I hope you really found that interesting. Sarah is somebody that initially responded to my call out some time ago for anybody that was a listener on the show who wanted to come and share any insights that they had gleaned, one from the show itself, but I think two, really about application of that within the context of what they're doing within their own organisation. Sarah was one of the first listeners to get in contact with us and say that she'd love to come on the show. So, by the way, if you feel you've got insights on this and from a practitioner perspective within an organisation, we're always really, really happy to hear from people. So, the best way to get in contact with us and potentially, get yourself onto the show is to drop me an email at podcast@rethinkingthehumanfactor.com. So that's podcast@re-thinkingthehumanfactor.com. So what's the best way to stay in contact with us here at the Rethinking the Human Factor? Well, simple way to do that is to subscribe via your podcast feed. So, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, whichever mechanism for publishing that you actually use. The other way is if you're a member of LinkedIn is to join the Rethinking the Human Factor group. And that's in its infancy, but it's building momentum. So you can stay in contact with us there. Or if you want to just drop us an email, the best way to do that probably is going to be just to drop me an email at podcast@re-thinkingthehumanfactor.com. So, if you're finding these type of insights really interesting, and the whole idea about these insights is that, these are insights which have come from a huge amount of research that we've been doing over the last seven and a half years. And every one of these episodes really brings along some key insights. So if you really want to know more about the insights, you really want to get what I call the shortcuts to the insights, then there's a number of ways that I can personally help you with that. So one of the things that I do for anybody involved in awareness, behaviour and culture, whether you're a CISO, education awareness manager, or an information security professional, data protection professional who's got another hat to wear, which is all around awareness, behaviour and culture, is to potentially come along to one of the events that we do. So I do a range of workshops based upon the insights and everything I've learned over the last 7.5 years. And that starts with a 1-day workshop through to a 3-day course, which is all about implementing the SABAC framework, which is a framework I've developed off the back of all that research, which has been embedded in a number of organizations around the world in 4 different languages now, and has even been ISO 27001 certified. Come along to one of our workshops or training courses, which you can find out more information about that by dropping me an email at shortcuts@re-thinkingthehumanfactor.com. Okay? Another way that you can gain access to the insights is to actually ask us to come conduct a benchmark. So we benchmark people, we benchmark organizations against the framework that we developed, the SABAC framework, and we produce a report. And that report will provide you with a sort of sense of direction in terms of things that you should really be looking to address over the next 3 years. And then we have a number of follow-up exercises and coaching and mentoring program for the team to develop the capacity to be able to implement those recommendations over the 3 years. So yeah, those are a couple of ways that you can benefit from all the research that we've been doing here at Rethinking the Human Factor. Okay, so who do we have next on the show? Well, our format returns to bringing in an external guest, and we really have got an amazing external guest on the show. Now, this external guest comes from a research background where she's combining an understanding of cognitive psychology and how that has an impact upon how you design learning programs. Now, a lot of what she's done is being focused around learning within an educational context. And that's from anything from secondary schools through to universities and further afield. This guest is a psychologist at heart, and she's taken that and then she's applying that within a learning environment. And she's a huge believer. One of the reasons why I think we got on really well is she's a huge believer in the concept, this is about making decisions based upon data. Her job in many aspects is to do the research and generate the data. But the thing she's really passionate about is then finding ways that it can be applied in everyday life to bring around positive outcomes. And that's where I think we really hit it off in terms of the initial email exchange. Anyway, so her name is Megan Sumaraki. So it'd be great to have you here with us on the show to listen to what Megan and I have got to say around the role of cognitive science, cognitive psychology. And remember, everything about the show is about designing with the human in mind. It's how you design learning and development initiatives and programs. And so for me, this is really, really important. It's something that comes again from that research that we've been doing. And Megan's just got such a great way of actually putting it. So it was an absolute pleasure to have her on the show. So I really look forward to having you join us on the show in a week's time. Many thanks for joining us. Bye.